Welcome in, everybody. We're going to get started in just a minute here. I'm just letting people come in from the waiting room here. Looks like we had over 80 registered today, which is great attendance, probably the best attendance we've had, or best registration numbers we've had in a while. So I love to see that. Glad you could all be here with us today. Oops. All right. Okay, I think we're good to go here. Hello and welcome everyone to Child Care Aware of Minnesota's March 2022 TEL Talk. TEL Talks, or Topics for Early Learning Leaders, are monthly webinars for early childhood program leaders to facilitate solutions-focused discussions for your questions about the early childhood field in Minnesota. These one-hour webinars do not meet the standards for a formal professional development training event, and participants will not receive a certificate of completion. TEL Talks are designed as a community building opportunity for leaders to engage and share ideas surrounding a specific content area. The TEL Talks team consists of Nikki Lepowski, Quality Improvement Coordinator, and myself, Christy Berg, Workforce Advising Coordinator. We work with Corey Woosley and Katie Hoffman at Child Care Aware of Minnesota to bring you TEL Talks. A couple of our recent topics have included WIDA early years and online learning experiences with Eager to Learn. And today we're joined by Nicole Berning from the Minnesota Department of Human Services on the topic of creating inclusive environments for children with autism to play, learn, and grow. On April 21st, Nikki Graff from Child Care Aware of Minnesota will join us to share information about the CARE Fellowship and advocacy. Please visit the Program Leaders page of our website to view previously recorded TEL Talks. And after today's presentation, you will receive an email from me with the PowerPoint slides and any other resources shared. Child Care Aware of Minnesota supports the professional growth of early childhood educators with professional development opportunities, Eager to Learn online training, grants, parent aware, and scholarships. And toward the end of our hour today, Janet Peterson will join us to share some information about the Retain Bonus application, which is a financial opportunity for early childhood practitioners. We are a resource and referral network for early childhood education in Minnesota. We assist families in finding childcare and keep the community informed on the importance of high quality childcare. Child Care Information Services is a department within our organization that specializes in statewide information sharing and assisting families who are looking for childcare. CCIS sends a welcome packet to new programs and surveys programs every 3 years on business policies and tuition rates. The rates are confidential and can influence CCAP reimbursement rates. CCIS receives calls from program leaders across Minnesota with general business questions and can route you to the appropriate person to contact. Child Care Aware partners with Center for Inclusive Childcare, which provides free relationship-based professional development, including support, modeling, and resources for childcare programs throughout Minnesota. A coach will spend time with your program, providing support focusing on the successful inclusion of children with challenging behaviors or special needs, implementing health and safety best practices, and supporting the unique needs of infants and toddlers in your care. Achieve Minnesota Center for Professional Development supports individual, trainer, and RBPD membership applicants and approves courses and training events. The Achieve MNCPD website has several resources to share, including a job board, policy info, Minnesota Career Lattice, and a virtual career guide. The TELTalks team partners with several organizations to offer coordinated resources surrounding early care and education needs. As always, participants of TELTalks are encouraged to ask questions, make contributions throughout the presentation, and engage in dialogue with our presenter. We would like our TELTalks to be interactive, so we would love to have you turn your cameras on, unmute to share your ideas and questions, or put them into the chat box at any point. We will be recording the TELTalk today, and we'll send a link to the recording in the follow-up email. And now I'm excited to turn it over to our presenter, Nicole Berning. Thank you for being here with us. I'll go ahead and stop sharing here so that you can take over in just a second here. There.
Great, well, thank you for having me. And I will share my screen here. Okay, hopefully that looks okay.
Looks good.
Perfect. And just pull up the chat here so I can see any questions coming in. So yes, thanks everybody for joining me today. I'm Nicole Berning. I work as the Autism Clinical Lead at the Minnesota Department of Human Services. So to get started today, I just wanted to give a little brief introduction around autism in Minnesota, talk about some of the updated prevalence data that we're seeing, and then share some of our online resources. And then I'm going to go through a few strategies of addressing some of these concerns around developmental delays or autism with families that you might be working with, and if families approach you with any questions of how we can best support families in that way. And then I'm going to provide a brief overview of the early intervention services and supports in Minnesota, and then talk about some strategies that we can all be working on to create really inclusive childcare settings for children with autism. So I'm sure many are familiar with autism spectrum disorder, but just a brief overview. Autism is something that is, of course, a spectrum, and it impacts everybody in a little bit of a different way. But it is always going to appear in those early childhood years. But how it does impact the individual, may vary throughout their lifetime, may vary throughout the day, especially when we see some of those social demands start to increase for the child. So especially in places like childcare settings, when the child is first introduced to some of those social interactions with their peers, we might start to see some of those characteristics displayed a bit more. So we also see individuals with autism have really often very strong visual processing. They often have very strong ability to speak their minds and be very honest and direct and straightforward. Oftentimes children are very detail oriented and have an exceptional memory. So we always do like to look for those strengths within our children as well. And so, as I mentioned, being that it is a spectrum, I think it can be challenging that even though you might know, one child with autism, that doesn't mean that you necessarily would be prepared for the next child that would have a diagnosis, because it is going to vary so much from child to child. So we do have a lot of different trainings on just understanding more about autism and the characteristics on the Minnesota Autism Resource Portal website. So I encourage you, if you ever want to take any of those trainings, many are free, many are available on demand all the time, and often have certificates or could count towards professional development too. So some of the characteristics for very young children that we're looking for, any limited demonstration of those more social emotional aspects. So things like eye contact, but also things like gestures. So, if the child's not pointing at things, if they're not following you pointing things out to them, that can often be an indicator of a diagnosis. Or if they're not responding to their name, they don't seem to come when you call them, those types of things. They're not interested in playing with their peers, if they're more interested in playing with toys, or maybe not even a toy, maybe a fixated interest on things that are not often things that children play with. We see kids maybe have a fascination with things like vacuum cleaners or fans, or I've seen kids with like garbage cans or things like that, that it just wouldn't be an item that you would normally see maybe other children gravitate towards or play with. That they might be especially, fascinated by, or just manipulating toys in a way where we don't see often other kids. So maybe lining them up or organizing them, but maybe not playing with them in an imaginative way or sharing them with others, or things like that. So also the piece about the communication that we always really encourage people to look for is often thinking, because a lot of kids could be fully verbal, and I think there's also that perception that autism might have to be only for kids that can't communicate, and that's not true. So many children could be fully verbal. A lot of times that might not lead to very functional communication though. So maybe they're reciting scripts for movies, so they know a lot of lines for movies or books, or they know their ABCs, or they can count up to 100, or some of those skills where I think parents then feel that they have these skills and they're emerging, and they're really strong in some of those areas, or they might be able to recite facts to you and things like that. But then we may see them struggle to just communicate what they need, or what they might want. And we see them get frustrated, or start crying, or having to take your hand to lead you to certain objects, and in order to communicate that. So so just watching for that ability of the child to have some of that functional communication. That would be a time that we would want to make a recommendation for the family to follow up and get an evaluation there. So we also see a higher likelihood for any children that have a sibling that is on the spectrum, or other genetic history within the family as well. So things like ADHD, anxiety, depression, that could also be something where they're more likely to have an autism diagnosis. So right now we're seeing 1 in 36 children in Minnesota with a diagnosis of autism. So this likely have a child within every childcare setting or every classroom that has a diagnosis, or would eventually have a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder with a prevalence that high. So also what we know is that autism can be identified as early as age 2, but right now in Minnesota, our average age is over the age of 5. So even beyond a child, entering into kindergarten, that they're actually now receiving that medical diagnosis. And that's concerning for us because that average length of time between a family having an initial concern around their child's development and then actually accessing a diagnosis can be more than 2 years, and really seeing that child miss out on very valuable early intervention services. And unfortunately, when we look across different races and ethnicity in Minnesota, we only see that number, that age of diagnosis continue to climb. So increased disparities for other communities that are not accessing that diagnosis right away. So again, very, very concerned, and that's why we do have a number of different resources and want to share this information with all of you so we can be communicating this with families. So a few of our online resources that are available, hopefully everyone's familiar, but if you're not, the Minnesota Autism Resource Portal is where we gather all of the information across the state agencies. So in addition to the Department of Human Services, you'll see things from Department of Education, Department of Health, and the Department of Employment and Economic Development as well. Under basic needs is where you'll find many of the childcare resources for families. And under our supports, you'll see a lot of our community partners. So places like Autism Society of Minnesota, ARC, PACER, a lot of those different community organizations that also support families as well. So we really want the portal to be a place that you can go to for all the information, and it can be trusted, that we're vetting any resource that's placed on the portal. So families aren't having to search and Google around and wonder if it is a trusted resource. We also have a contact us form on the portal, and this can be a place where a family can ask us any question if they need to find a provider to evaluate the child, or if they need to access early intervention services, they can email us and start there. Or certainly we have that information too that they can search for on the portal. We also have a Facebook page that corresponds with the portal that we always try to share upcoming events and trainings and information for families on there. So just another way to be reaching families and to be sharing this with them. So definitely a good place if they've received an initial diagnosis to share the portal with them. We also have an event request form. So if you ever identify a training need or a group that would benefit from some additional information or training on autism, we're always happy to come out and do that as well. And we have an event calendar, so it always shows all of our upcoming trainings and events that we're doing on there too. So this is just the childcare section. I just wanted to highlight and include the link so you see kind of what that section would provide you. See, there's a question on if other states offer something like this. I know we did model the portal after a couple of states that have similar resources, but I wouldn't say that, it's definitely not a requirement that every state has something specific like our portal. And it was really developed with input from families and from providers and stakeholders in the community. So we're always continuously adding resources and information as we find them. So if you ever go to look for something and you don't see that it's there, or you have a really amazing resource that you share with families, we would love to add that to the portal so that you can use that contact us form, and we will get that resource added as well. So yes, the section you can click on some more. I also wanted, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the Center for Inclusive Childcare podcast, but we had done a couple of episodes for them specific on autism. And so the first podcast kind of goes through what are some of those early signs to watch for, both for parents and professionals. And then the second part, we talk exclusively about the portal. So that can be another nice resource to be sharing with families or those that you work with to hear about some more of that information.
Hey, Nicole, I just want to interrupt just briefly. We have Tuba has a question, I think, that might pertain to some of the information. So I just want to pause quickly for her, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Oh, thanks, Nikki. Hi, Nicole. Thanks for hosting today. Really great information you're sharing. On the previous page that you had shared, or I'm sorry, maybe it was one more on the website. It had mentioned, yes, so the portal was created with input from caregivers. So when you're saying families could reach out to seek information about those caregivers, is there something unique or specific those referrals are doing for children with autism, or are they just for Star Parent Aware rated centers, or what does that look like for those centers, if that makes sense?
So I'm not sure I'm entirely understanding the question, but yes. So we typically, if parents are contacting us, they're often looking for a medical doctor to do an evaluation to determine if their child has autism. So if they've had some concerns around their development, that they would be reaching out to help identify someone there. So yeah, they might have gotten a recommendation or a referral from a teacher or their childcare provider. They might have had a concern, so they're reaching out to us for identifying who could complete that evaluation for them.
I see. That's the context of caregivers. I'm sorry, I was understanding that as like providers. And then if parents were calling in for a referral. Okay, gotcha.
Yep. And then just one other section I wanted to point out is we do have a lot of safety resources. That can be something that we often hear is a concern, is just children with autism eloping or bolting away from a safe area or away from caregivers. So we do have the dangers of wandering for children with autism as a resource that walks through some steps that families can take for preventing wandering, for teaching their child some skills to, have their needs met, or be able to communicate what they want rather than having to bolt away from the family without their knowledge, and obviously access sometimes some very dangerous situations. So that resource, we definitely recommend looking into that. Also some things around interacting with first responders or families developing a safety plan for their child. We always just encourage any of those aspects, because we know, again, with those communication deficits, sometimes children aren't aware of some of the dangers that are around them. So making sure that families are able to come up with those plans and make sure that the child is safe in any of those, events of a fire or emergency situation there. So. And on the portal, we also have our pathways resources, which I'm going to go through in more detail throughout the presentation today, but you'll find all of those available. And we have a request form that you can also use to get access to printed copies of all of the resources. And each one of the pathway documents is translated into Hmong, Somali, Spanish, Russian, Vietnamese, Karen, and Oromo. So we do hope that, we're trying to reach and be as accessible as we can be to families so that they have that information out there. But we'll share a little bit more about what those pathway resources are. So next, going through addressing some of the concerns with families. Just wanted to pose the question out there of how comfortable people are with bringing up concerns to a family member. So if you want to put in the chat, if you're not comfortable at all, if you're a little nervous about it, if you're feeling pretty confident, you feel like you have some tools to share, it'd be great to hear how everyone's feeling in that area. Awesome. Feel willing, feel like I have some tools. Great, thank you. Well, as others keep adding their responses, I'll just keep going here. But yeah, so if you do start to identify any of those concerns for the child, and it may be autism or maybe another developmental or speech delay of some kind, we do really encourage that you are sharing that with the family. You are a very valuable resource for parents that are looking towards you for that trusted information, and you're with their child so often. And so very, very important that we're able to share these resources. We definitely don't want to take that wait and see approach. We see that early intervention can make such a big difference for the child and really lead to their success in school and set them up for success. So as much as we can help them get access to that proper identification of autism at a young age and get them access to the early intervention is very, very helpful. So just a few tips, we're saying always really be proactive as much as we can be sharing this information with families long prior to any concerns being identified. So families are just tracking those milestones. They understand, how important it is that we're aware of the milestones and what to be doing to help their child develop in those areas. And particularly those more language and social emotional milestones as well. So too, we often hear families, well, the child's walking or, they have great gross motor skills and things like that. But again, taking a look more at the language and the social emotional aspect. Scheduling regular check-ins with families, again, as much as we can be doing this proactively versus reactively. Just hopefully families would be a little bit more receptive to this information if we're allowing time and creating kind of space for those conversations to discuss those concerns. And if we can, always having them in person. I always think it's especially helpful if you've gathered some specific examples and of what you're observing to be able to share with the family will just be helpful and hopefully then might also kind of trigger them to think, oh, yep, now that you mentioned it, I know that we've seen that at home, or someone else has pointed that out to me as well. And then maybe they'll feel more comfortable and more confident sharing those concerns with their pediatrician. Always trying to highlight any strengths for the child. We don't want to just be pointing out any of the delays and the deficits and things like that. And I see there's a comment about the wait and see from parents might be getting the wait and see from physicians. And yes, absolutely. And we'll kind of talk about some of those resources, but I do think as much as if you're giving them the information and empowering them with some of these resources, like some of the milestone tracker apps and some of those things. So, a lot of parents can go on and take that MCHAT is often that screener that pediatricians are using to identify a delay or something like autism. And so families can actually go on and take that on their own. It doesn't have to be administered by a trained provider or clinician or anything. It can actually just be taken by the family themselves. And so oftentimes them walking into those well child checkups and those appointments with the physician, already having this information and identifying that there's a concern or a delay, oftentimes we see a much better follow through for the pediatrician to then recommend that evaluation if the parents also have their concerns, brought up during that appointment. So again, as much as we can be empowering them with the information, obviously you're not diagnosing the child, so you don't have to even bring up the word autism necessarily, but just encouraging them to schedule those appointments with their pediatrician. Families also don't have to have a referral from their pediatrician. If they truly feel strongly that their child needs to be evaluated, they can call those providers directly and set up an appointment. They don't have to wait for a referral from their doctor for that. So, I mean, we always like families to talk with their pediatricians and go through. Oftentimes, insurance and networks and hospitals can be helpful for them to refer someone in their network, but just knowing that there are other workarounds if that's something that families are struggling with there too. So we also just include some sample script conversations. I think this is always very helpful to have in any childcare setting of, exactly what should be said, and people can kind of tailor this and change it around for the specific child, but it can be very helpful just so, if any staff are feeling nervous or uncomfortable with having that conversation, that they have a script that they can start to go off of and then tailor that for the specific child, just so that they can feel confident and that they are sharing the correct information when they are bringing up any concerns with the family. And then just following up, so if you have mentioned a concern, asking the family if they followed through and, followed up on any referral, or if they've talked to their doctor, if they've made an appointment. Because too, I think that's where we see that, if families are reluctant or they're struggling with finding someone in their network, there's certainly things that we can be doing to help address any of those barriers, but just making sure that we're trying to close that loop and follow through, making sure that they get those appointments scheduled. So all the while trying to be really, supportive and respectful, and, it might have to take a few conversations. We might have to bring this up a few times before families can absorb it and be able to move forward with some of those next steps. But so just some other scripts here, as much as we can be validating if they do bring concerns to you, if they're asking you if you have any concerns, maybe they have noticed something at home, or they know the child's not keeping up the same as some of the siblings or things like that, that you're helping to validate their concerns, and then again gives them some really actionable next steps that they can follow. So that first steps resource really helps to lay out those developmental milestones, and it does have tips for family members of how they can be helping to enhance those skills in their child throughout the first 2 years of life. And then you'll see on the back of the resource that it does have all of the different screening programs in Minnesota, and some of those ways that families can get connected to ways to help address some of those developmental delays. So things like Help Me Grow and Help Me Connect and child and teen checkups and things like that. So very helpful resource to be sharing and communicating with families, again, prior to any delays or concerns being identified. And as much as we can be posting these around the childcare settings and have this information out there and available for them, it can be very helpful. Again, it's just more common knowledge. It's just a resource that is accessible for all families. And then, sharing, I think, connecting families to the variety of different screening programs. So for some, families might be a medical assistant, so they are getting those child and teen checkups. Those are free to families on medical assistance every year. So that might be an option to access. Help Me Grow, of course, is great for making those referrals to the families. But we see families entering from so many different access points. And so just making sure that families do have that connection. The follow along and other programs that are often connected through more of that public health or county setting can be especially helpful. That helps families get connected to those healthcare coverage options and local resources, again, in their community. So I just included a few other links that you'll have throughout the presentation of some other surveillance milestone trackers and some other free materials that you can always print off and share with families as well. But I think our biggest message is, encourage families not to wait and, really stress the importance of that early intervention and why that's so critical for the child to access that before they reach school age. So we do see often those referrals happening for Help Me Grow, which is great. It's definitely helpful for the child to get access there, but we're also really encouraging that recommendation for that medical evaluation as well. Things like medical assistance and any early intervention program through DHS does require a medical diagnosis. So it wouldn't be enough that the child is identified through the education system. They do need that medical evaluation. So we do have comprehensive evaluation providers, and they're found in the directory that's here provided. We have over 270 of them across the state here in Minnesota. And many, you hear often that there's concerns around wait times, but we do have ways that we can help connect you to providers that have shorter wait times. So I think that again, is always something we want to make sure that we're reaching out and providing them with as many tools and resources to get connected to that provider. Because that comprehensive evaluation is going to determine that eligibility for early intervention services for the family. So this is a resource that just summarizes that medical identification and that educational determination piece for families. And on the back, you'll see just some of those characteristics of autism. But again, it can just help explain to families the two pathways to services and make sure that they're following down both roads there. And then again, we're always connecting families to Help Me Connect. I'm sure everybody's aware of that, but I think this also really stresses that importance of the two pathways. So expands it beyond just the Help Me Grow, where they're accessing the educational resources. This does stress the need to also then look into those home and community-based medical services. So then yes, and I will talk more about some of those early intervention services with the medical diagnosis here. So then the next steps resource, this breaks down the very next steps that a family should take following that autism diagnosis. And we break it down by those service systems. So within that primary care setting, we're recommending families ask for any referrals. So that might be like OT, speech, therapy, if they have any concerns around the child's diet or any sleep disorders or epilepsy that we see frequently for children. Again, consulting with their primary care doctor around anything like that. Any GI issues as well. If they want to ask about supplements or being on gluten-free diets or anything like that, again, we always want them to consult with their primary care doctor first. And then, of course, within the school setting, getting connected to those resources. And then you'll see in that red section on the form here, the comprehensive evaluation that opens up that door for those early intensive intervention services, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more here. And then you'll see the community resources, the trainings, and then in that green section, you'll see information about that healthcare coverage. Because again, a lot of those, things like applied behavior analysis or ABA services that are a bit more intensive, and even some developmental approaches as well, like things like floor time or the play project or things like that. It does get quite expensive, and so families often are having to access medical assistance to help fund those. And then we do have videos on the portal as well that help explain the diagnosis and talk about access to services, and they're featuring families in Minnesota from African American communities, American Indian, Hmong, Latino, and Somali communities. And this can just be helpful. It's in their spoken language, and it can be families that have experienced some of the same things. They look like them, they speak that same language, and can just be a helpful resource to again, share that initial diagnosis with families and talk about what are our next steps here. So those early intervention services, I mentioned EIDBI, so that's the early intensive developmental and behavioral intervention benefit. And we really intend the benefit to help work on those core characteristics of autism. So teaching meaningful communication, working on social interaction skills, help address those interfering behaviors, teaching self-care, safety skills, really helping to build the child's independence so that they can be successful both at home and then also when they go to school, that they can be in the most inclusive and the least restrictive setting possible. And then we also have a very big family caregiver training component as part of EIDBI. So really wanting the families to learn those strategies as well. And we have a pretty broad definition of caregiver, so that could be really anybody that works with the child on a daily basis. So they could also have providers that come into childcare setting or preschool settings, or have paraprofessionals and provide some more additional coaching and training just to help meet the child's needs and how best to support them in those different environments. So eligibility for this program is birth up to age 21. Now those ages may vary by provider, but again, we're happy to help identify a provider that will serve the age group of the children that you're looking for. And there's that comprehensive evaluation to determine that medical necessity for the service. But we see kids with autism and also other related conditions. So things like fetal alcohol, we see Down syndrome, kids with ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, a number of other conditions as well can access this program. Family can be on any form of medical assistance, and there are some private insurance companies that will also cover these services as well. So this is just a little bit more information on those related conditions, because we do get some questions about that, but we don't often go diagnosis or condition specific. It's really more about the characteristics the child might be demonstrating to determine if EIDBI is a good fit for them. So we do have an online referral tool, and you can find this on the portal as well. But that will just walk you through step by step, helping the family find a provider, getting connected to services. There's also a map that shows all of the providers across the state. We have over 170 agencies across the state that are providing services. To date, we've had over 3,200 kids that have accessed EIDBI services since it got started just a few years ago. So we're excited that we're getting kids into those early intervention services now. So. And we do have the EIDBI brochure in a number of different languages as well. So you can request these as well from the portal and share those out with families as well. And we do have an online training both for providers and one for families that talk more about EIDBI services. But as I mentioned, they can be provided in any setting. So we see center-based, home-based providers. They can go out into the community and help the child build skills there. But yes, in the childcare setting, in school, and then we do also have a number of providers that offer services via telehealth too. And there's a question about if the EIDBI gets reflected in a child's IEP. And nope, it's not impacting their IEP or their IFSP. This is completely funded through Medicaid or through that private insurance, so it doesn't impact their IEP in any way. It's not meant to replace or build anything related to academic supports. That's all provided from the school. This is completely separate. These are home and community-based services, so completely separately funded outside of the IEP. So some strategies of making sure that our childcare settings are inclusive for kids with autism. I just wanted to ask you, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see kids with autism face in the childcare setting? Just be helpful to, you can share some of those in the chat. And while you're sharing some of the dysregulation, sensory stimuli, social emotional development, rapport building with peers. Perfect, thank you. Yes, all good examples. Not having access to developmentally appropriate toys and materials. Misunderstanding or bias related to their needs. Perfect, yes. Yes, I think we do struggle to make sure that kids are getting identified with the correct diagnosis. That can be a big thing, because that's definitely different of how to approach the diagnosis. So when we talk about setting up that setting, I think as much as possible, we're trying to be as proactive as we can and less reactive to some of the things that might be a barrier for them, or responding to those behaviors once they've become dysregulated. So I'm going to talk about a number of different areas today of some of those more proactive strategies that we can go through. So some of the training professional development opportunities, making sure that all staff at all of our centers, really understand those characteristics of autism, going through some of those online trainings that we offer on the portal. There's also some trainings just on, ways to adapt the environment, some accommodations that we can be making. What are some strategies to teach additional communication, social interaction skills? How can we be managing some of these behaviors effectively? And then I think also those crisis intervention techniques are very important as well. So again, I've included that training link there. So one particular training that we always recommend is the ASD strategies in action. And this is actually up to 40 hours of online training. It's broken down into 3 age modules. So there is a toddler preschool age module specifically. So this can be very helpful for anyone to take and also to be sharing with families as well. So another proactive strategy is we're always trying to make sure that we're setting very clear expectations for the child. I think oftentimes is that we find that we're giving a lot of instructions, we're communicating a lot of the instructions for children, but maybe that child with autism, they don't understand what those expectations are. They're not clear on what behavior they should be engaging in. So then they do become more anxious in those settings when they're not clear, when there's not a lot of structure for them. So as much as we can be posting and making sure that we're sharing those instructions in very short, clear, concrete ways for the child to understand, and then really looking at what does that look like across different settings. So what does that mean? So if we tell everyone that we need to be safe in this environment, what does that look like? They need to ask before they leave the room. We want to maybe identify dangers throughout the room, oftentimes putting up a visual, so things that might be dangerous, or like having any of the exits labeled with stop signs, and then teaching the child what those visual reminders and things mean. So just some of those examples of how we can be making sure that the rules and the expectations of that particular setting are easily communicated for the child. I've just included a couple examples of the visuals. I thought this one was really nice around the waiting expectations in the hallway, because I think too that can be those transition times can be especially challenging for kids. And so as much as possible as we can be including those visuals and walking them through that each time, so that they really understand what those expectations are and what they need to be doing. Rather than telling them not to do it, can we tell them, exactly what we do want them to be doing? Other strategies, if we can look at the physical setting, really looking at specific activities, having them labeled out so it's very clear for the child. We want them to be as independent as possible. So if they can be, going to those designated areas and getting their own materials, or knowing where the toys get put away, knowing where to find things, again, just that it's very visually oriented for the child to identify those activities. The less, instructions or auditory instructions that we have to be giving, that can then often be very overwhelming for the child. And that way too, if you're often able to point to the activity, or send them with a peer model to help show them where things belong, again, versus using a lot of those verbal instructions. We also like to see spaces built in for movement, sensory breaks, any type of like calming corners. And I've included some links for some resources there. And then just, trying to evaluate for each child, like what might be some of their triggers, and can they just be physically removed from the setting? Sometimes we'll hear kids, they get very, bothered by like certain tags on their clothing, can be really upsetting. Or is it a specific noise that, a fan is making in the room, or is it the temperature of the room? So just trying to kind of evaluate, are there things that we could adjust just to help some of that sensory regulation for the child? Other ways, having some of those group activities in smaller pods, it helps kind of decrease the noise level for children, and also just encourages more of that peer-to-peer support. So having them get set up with a buddy or a good model. Again, they can just be, following that peer that is setting a good example, and they can be, imitating their behavior. We could be encouraging that. Oftentimes too, it might, be switching out that chair, offering some other seating alternatives for the child in those settings. So, the sensory balls or beanbag chairs, or just things like that. again, might really help the child to get more regulated, or offering to be able to sit on the floor, or they want a chair. It really just kind of depends on the child there. Other ways, we also encourage having books and videos and posters in those settings of children with disabilities, and teaching their peers what does it mean? How do I interact with a peer that has autism? And I included a link there that has a lot of great early childhood books that do have characters with autism, and that way we can be really helping those peers in the childcare setting to know how can I approach this child, and know how best to support them too. And we'll see those increased peer interactions. And as much as, I mentioned those modeling techniques, so you demonstrate the activity or the expectation, and then making sure that, that you can model it or do it with them, or even role play the expectation, and then trying to see the child be more independent with some of those activities that we're asking. I think also just that communication with families can really make a huge difference as far as the sensory regulation in these environments. So, this is just one example of a, we use this one-page profile template to establish some of that communication. But this way you can write down what some of those strengths of the child are, what some of their preferences are, what are some of those triggers for this particular child, and then what are some calming strategies that everyone can be able to utilize. And this can be, developed for the child, it can be added to. I think it's also nice to have something on a daily basis to be checking in with the parent. Oftentimes, maybe it's the child didn't sleep well at night. Children with autism are actually found to have a lower level of melatonin. And so we know that sleep issues are very common. And so that could be something that just immediately we know we might need to lower the demands of the day, and just really be expecting that they are going to be dysregulated throughout the day today. And so just having that heads up and that communication across families can be really helpful. So I just included a few other ideas for visual supports. Those timers, calendars can be especially helpful, and then those social stories as well. Anything that can help with that visual processing, help them follow directions. And what's nice is that these easily transfer across environments and people, especially again, those transitions, they can be so challenging for a child with autism. And it really also then works on helping them to communicate. They can use the pictures themselves. They can increase their independence by having those expectations and those visuals clearly spelled out for them. Some other supports and accommodations. So ask the families if there's any accommodations that are made at home, and just making sure that we help transfer those to the childcare setting. And then looking at some of those sensory activities. So oftentimes just showing the children that there are specific things in this environment. So we've seen examples like fish tanks, puzzles, books, fidgets, sand and water tables, those kinds of activities. So that when we do start to see them escalate in some of their behaviors, can we help them get directed to some of these more calming activities, and get back to that regulated state again, and not see them reach that level where we're really dysregulated. And then any assistive technology, so sometimes those noise canceling headphones, or even like sunglasses for bright lights and things like that, can also be super helpful. I would like to stress if there's ever like parties or field trips or special events that are happening, those can be very especially challenging. It's overwhelming. It's out of the normal routine for that child. So as much as possible, if we can be preparing them well in advance, talk about this, count it down on the calendar, include a social story about what the expectations are going to be on that day or in that new setting, and then just some ideas around some different sensory activities that you can be including and having on hand for them to access. Always thinking too about those rewards. So anytime we are seeing those preferred behaviors and the things that we want to see, that we're delivering a lot of rewards as well. And yes, we have the link to the student profile, so it'll be in the slides when I send them out, but it's actually found on the Disability Hub of Minnesota. So one of our websites that DHS also has. So that is where you can find the one-page profile. It's under their person-centered tools. And there's a few others as well, but you'll find the template for the one-page profile there. Some other strategies we always encourage: breaking down the task. So if something's especially challenging, or if you see that the child is often refusing to do something, that as much as possible, can we try to think about, what is it about this activity that is hard for them? Maybe it is a skill deficit, maybe it's a lack of motivation for that particular activity. But then just this example here too, some kids might be able to follow a visual schedule that's really broad and just kind of walks them through, their whole day and has those types of activities, whereas some kids, they might need that specific, just toothbrushing is broken down into individual steps. So just even thinking about within those visual strategies that we're using of how we can tailor it to each specific child. I've also included an environmental checklist. I think these are just helpful questions for professionals to be asking. How can I create our environment to be welcoming of all children? And there is an inclusion planning checklist that the Center-Based Early Care and Education Program has that I included as well. And then just going through some of those sensory components too, again, thinking, is it just something that's overstimulating? Is this too bright? Is it too loud? Are they especially sensitive to touch? Any of those types of things that we could be helping to adjust or help them get used to again, help that sensory regulation. So, and then just some tips for responding to interfering behavior. So if the child does become dysregulated, that we're always making sure, I think the important component first is just regulating our own behavior, and then trying to then, scale back those demands so that we're not placing any increased demands, scaling back any of our verbal instructions there, and really just modeling or gesturing towards, again, those calming activities or things that you do need the child to be following, again, as much as possible, taking out those distractors, taking out those triggers, and then moving the child on or distracting them, moving on to the new activity and the next activity. We also have a lot of these strategies and supports included on the portal. So you can read through these different strategies, or if you have a particular area that you might be struggling with and you want some more information, you can always go back to that section and find the information. So I just included the email inbox that we have in the portal and the Facebook page address as well. And I'll just throw the portal link here in the chat so everybody has that. But yes, we'll also get those slides sent out to you too. So any last questions for me?
Nicole, there was a question posed earlier. I don't know if it's in the group chat, but specifically about earlier in the slides, you mentioned like case management or follow through. Is there going to be an individual that someone could connect with to help like walk them through these resources and kind of show them, since there's so many great things we don't want someone to miss?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, sharing that next steps document with the family is definitely very helpful, because that does outline what those next steps are to take after their child receives a diagnosis. And that it includes the information to get in touch with their county, because yes, that's where they would get connected to case management services through the county. And so they can call up the local county and get connected there to answer any of those questions. But that would often be, I think, a good first place is to share that resource, and that you could share it with them electronically or print it off and walk them through it. And then that way the family can get started going through that resource, or they can go through it kind of as they want to check it off the list. It's nice with that resource. I'll just kind of go back to it here in the slides. So on the front, it has all the resources, but then on the back, it actually breaks it down by the timeline. So And then it has a space for them to write down like who they spoke to and when their appointment is that they might have scheduled. And then it has some prompts there of when they might need to follow up or update that evaluation or follow up and make another phone call or things like that. But and then that contact us page on the portal. I mean, we're always happy to, if the family is struggling in any way, to get connected to any of these resources. We're always happy to walk them through that and get connected as well.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think I missed that backside of that resource, and that's going to be really helpful for our educators, program leaders and families to have a place to, write something down and have it tangible. So
Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely.
Wonderful.
And I saw the question about the one-page profile, so I'll throw that template here in the chat as well. And yes, we do have a person-centered planning section on the portal that has the one-page profile and some other person-centered planning tools as well. But that gives you the most direct link there. So.
We've got a couple more minutes here, and we can certainly take time for additional questions for Nicole if you have them. Otherwise, we've got Janet Peterson, who is our one of our grants coordinators at Child Care Aware Minnesota, who is hoping we can hang on for a couple more minutes because she's got some information to share with you all about the retain bonus application. But any more questions for Nicole? Well, Nicole, we're so glad that you could join us today for this conversation. You provided so much information. I'm really looking forward to writing this follow-up email. And if there are any PDF documents, Nicole, that you have, we could send those along too as attachments. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Nicole. Janet, do you need co-host abilities here, or are you just coming off a mute?
I'm just going to talk.
Great. You're welcome.
Thanks for giving me a couple minutes. I just wanted to pop in again and talk about retain. At this point, some of you might be getting tired of hearing about retain, but we are enjoying a larger budget this year. And so we want to make sure that we get the word out to center staff who can start applying for a retain bonus starting April 1st. So we always have a little bit of difficulty reaching classroom staff in centers because we really don't have a direct connection to talk with them. Unless they are religiously following our Facebook page, they might miss information on retain bonus unless we can get it out through directors or other means. So I really appreciate being able to just remind you again to take a look at our website, Child Care Aware of Minnesota, and direct staff to take a peek at it. We do have a webinar on the website that explains how to apply for retain, and it goes over some of the eligibility requirements. Some of those key eligibility requirements are a career lattice step showing on a developed learning record of at least 6. We can also accept a step 5 if the individual has completed MNCDA or MNITCDA learning community. And then we also look for a position working in a licensed program directly with children at least 30 hours a week for at least 1 year. For those part year programs, we look for 1,560 hours per year. So those are just a few highlights of the eligibility requirements. I do like to remind folks too that we've had a policy change that allows recipients to apply every year. In the past, we tried to spread out the budget by having people apply every other year. But now we're happy to say that if you have staff that received a bonus last spring, they can go ahead and apply again this spring. So I know we're coming up on 1 minute left. So definitely ask a quick question if you have one, but you can also email me through the web page also. Directors do qualify if you also have that dual role of working in the classroom. I know that in some centers, you know, you might do administrative duties part of your week, and you're kind of in the classroom for the other part. So we do look for those designations on the learning record. So how many hours devoted to director responsibilities, how many hours devoted to classroom responsibilities. Oh yes, website in the chat. Good idea. I'll do that real quick. I also wanted to, I don't think she was able to join, but we have a new staff member, Mina Vang. She will gradually be taking the lead on retain bonus. So you'll probably meet her through answering questions on the through the email, or maybe calling you back to answer questions. But just so you know that we've got someone that you'll become familiar with in the retain world.
Janet, what does the retain bonus cover?
Oh, good. It is, you know, pretty unbridled money. We don't have any receipts that someone turns in to show how they spent it. It can be used for classroom supplies, personal expenses. Some people take a vacation that they have not been able to afford in the past. It's truly a wage enhancement bonus, so it can be used in any way.
Any other questions for Janet? I'll include, Janet, you have a blurb I think we used last month that I can throw in into the follow-up as well. So including a link and some information as well for you.
I should say too that it's not first come, first serve. Whether an application comes in on April 1st or May 31st, we look at it and score it the same. So, you know, if someone needs some time to update their develop membership information, that can take a little while, but have no fear. You know, if you start to take a look at that right now and start those processes, should be done in plenty of time to apply for retain.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you, Janet, for joining us. And thanks to everybody who was able to, oh, we've got a question in the chat from Tuba. Are you still seeing a competitive market?
In regards to the retain bonus, in the past, it was very competitive. However, I'm glad you asked that, because we're pretty excited, which is why we keep talking about it. We anticipate being able to award every eligible applicant this year. And that will be the first year that I've ever heard of that happening. So
that's amazing. I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for the Tell Talk. Be looking for the follow-up email to come within the next few days. And I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon. Take care.